A iniziare i lavori il professor Paolo Trianni, teologo e filosofo, stabile qui in Università Gregoriana, responsabile per le religioni dell'Asia per il Centro Studi Interreligiosi. La sua ricerca si concentra sul confronto filosofico, teologico e spirituale intercorrente tra cristianesimo e religioni indiane, su cui vanta una bibliografia, professore, che non sto così a enumerare. Cito solo l'ultimo dei volumi come curatore, Rileggere la teologia di Teilhard de Chardin, una teologia promettente per il domani, edito per i tipi di Queriniana proprio quest'anno. Ecco, a lei la parola.
Allora, intanto buon pomeriggio, benvenuti anche da parte mia e ringrazio anch'io gli organizzatori, di questo interessantissimo convegno. Io ho voluto intitolare la mia relazione Il Buddha, la sapienza del vuoto. Ecco, però potevo anche intitolarlo Il Buddha, la sapienza del silenzio, per mettere in evidenza si sente bene? Graffia un po'. Per mettere in evidenza, forse se mi allontano funziona meglio, per mettere in evidenza uno degli aspetti fondamentali dell'insegnamento di questa figura che, come diceva anche Henri de Lubac, non si può ignorare senza danno. Non si può, anche se siamo cristiani o di un'altra fede, non ammirarlo. Ecco, de Lubac appunto diceva che non lo si può ignorare e ha dedicato 3 libri proprio al Buddha e al suo insegnamento. E si potrebbe fare proprio una storia del dialogo interreligioso tra cristianesimo e buddismo. Pensate che alle Hawaii c'è una rivista che si intitola Buddhist Christian Studies, quindi è molto sviluppato il dialogo tra cristianesimo e buddismo. Tra coloro che, tra i teologi, tra i missionari che hanno incontrato questa religione, possiamo ricordare Ippolito Desideri, per quanto riguarda il Tibet, era un pistoiese del 1700, in parte, ma solo in parte, anche Matteo Ricci in Cina, e hanno fatto un grandissimo lavoro i gesuiti che sono stati missionari in Giappone, perché sono diventati dei grandi esperti in Zen. Tipo, graffia un po', forse io spento. Ugo Enomia Lassalle, per esempio, è una persona che è diventato un maestro Zen, e Henrik Dumoulin addirittura ha scritto una storia dello Zen. Per quanto riguarda invece la tradizione Theravada, potrei ricordare Aloysius Pieris nello Sri Lanka, e una figura che ha dialogato in maniera significativa con il buddismo, soprattutto il buddismo Zen, è stato anche Thomas Merton, famoso per i suoi dialoghi con Daisetsu Suzuki, ma anche per una singolare esperienza mistica che ha fatto a Polonnarua, nello Sri Lanka, guardando le statue del Buddha. Altre figure che potrei ricordare sono quelle di Willis Jagger, che era un benedettino, che anche lui è diventato un maestro Zen, e Vincent Shiseido Ushida, che era un buddista che si è convertito al cattolicesimo e ha aperto un piccolo eremo nelle Alpi giapponesi. Però ecco, questo nostro convegno nasce sullo stimolo, di Romano Guardini. E Romano Guardini è tra quelli che hanno stimato il Buddha e merita ricordare, non so se possiamo invertire direttamente, è da ricordare tra coloro che hanno stimato questa figura. Pensate che in un saggio, Der Herr, il Signore, che è del 1937, ma già circolavano nel 1933 e nel 1936 dei pezzi, diciamo così, lui fece un elogio del Buddha che merita che io lo citi in estensione, perché è veramente significativa. Guardini scrisse questo: c'è soltanto un individuo che potrebbe suggerire l'idea di un accostamento a Gesù, Buddha. Grande è il mistero che circonda quest'uomo. La libertà che egli possiede è enorme, quasi sovrumana. Egli però dimostra anche una bontà straordinaria, possente, come lo è una forza di dimensioni mondiali. Buddha sarà forse l'ultimo individuo con il quale il cristianesimo è chiamato a confrontarsi. Ciò che egli significhi dal punto di vista cristiano non ce lo ha ancora detto nessuno. Forse Cristo non ha avuto soltanto un predecessore nell'Antico Testamento, Giovanni, l'ultimo dei profeti, ma anche un altro che viene dal cuore della cultura antica, Socrate, ed un terzo che ha proferito l'ultima parola della conoscenza e superamento religioso orientali. E costui è il Buddha. Sono parole molto forti, tant'è vero che quando questo saggio di cristologia, era un saggio di cristologia, venne tradotto in italiano, questa frase venne tagliata. Mi ricordo che io ho incontrato questa frase quando ero ancora studente a Pisa, in un saggio di Valerio Mannucci. Però ecco, Guardini ha anche altre frasi significative in rapporto al buddismo. Ne cito un'altra molto più breve ma significativa. Se il Cristo non fosse venuto e non mi avesse chiamato, mi sarei volentieri unito a quel monaco e a quelli come lui. Insomma, spiega molto bene, diciamo, la seduzione e il fascino che ha provato nei confronti di questa figura. Però all'interno dell'essenza del cristianesimo, che è un saggio del 38, anche se un suo pezzo, un suo articolo risale al 29, fece delle importantissime puntualizzazioni teologiche, sostenendo che c'è una differenza sostanziale, perché il Buddha indica semplicemente una via, seguite il mio percorso. Il Cristo è la via, si autoproclama come via, verità e vita. E aggiunge, commentando la libertà del Buddha, che la libertà del Buddha non è la libertà del Cristo, ma è la libertà di una conoscenza filosofica che riflette sulla nullità, la vacuità del mondo. Tra l'altro poi Guardini aggiungeva del mondo decaduto, ed era un'aggiunta importante. Quindi, pur in un quadro di ammirazione, Guardini presenta le due figure come incomparabili. Tra l'altro, sempre in quel periodo, anche Pierre Teilhard de Chardin ha presentato un confronto tra Cristo e Buddha in chiave dialettica. Queste sue considerazioni le trovate in un saggio che si intitola Le direzioni del futuro, perché Teilhard de Chardin ha vissuto più di 20 anni in Cina. E Teilhard de Chardin contrapponeva il primo, il Cristo, quindi con il pleroma, il dono del suo spirito, al Buddha, il cui insegnamento invece è il vuoto, la vacuità, quindi pleroma versus shunyata. Ecco, la vacuità buddista ha tre valenze, diciamo così. Rinvia, uno, alla insostanzialità dell'essere, due, al vuoto del pensiero e tre, all'assenza di un Atman. E una differenza decisiva per quanto riguarda induismo e buddismo, voi sapete che il buddismo si distacca dall'induismo, è che mentre nell'induismo tutto è illusione, tutto è vuoto, potremmo dire, ma una cosa vera c'è, ed è l'Atma, quindi quell'essenza divina che è dentro di noi, il buddismo nega anche quella. Quindi è evidente la lontananza di questi scenari dal messaggio di Gesù, che non ha insegnato nulla sul vuoto o anche sul silenzio. Anzi, semmai l'insegnamento di Gesù è incentrato sul dialogo personale e sulla preghiera. Ecco, Da questo punto di vista c'è una distanza tra Buddha e Cristo enorme e la si può riassumere non soltanto come shunyata versus pleroma, ma anche parola versus silenzio. Ecco, da un punto di vista sia teologico che filosofico, mi sembra veramente fondamentale riflettere sul concetto di vuoto buddista che si lega in parte, anzi strutturalmente, anche a quello di silenzio. E mi sembra opportuno fare un richiamo a un celebre libro, ci danno un po' di tormento questi microfoni oggi. Vediamo se riusciamo a risolvere. Sì, abbiamo già cambiato 2, ne cambio 3. Adesso. Cerchiamo di risolvere anche per dopo. No, è un problema generale. Proviamo, dai, magari stando fermi ad una certa distanza ce la facciamo. Dicevo, è opportuno fare un richiamo ad un celebre libro di Raymond Panikkar, Il silenzio del Buddha. È bene ricordare che Panikkar è stato uno studioso sia di induismo ma anche di buddismo e questo testo nasce originariamente nel 1970, poi ha avuto varie rielaborazioni, diciamo così, e siamo arrivati ad una pubblicazione definitiva nel 2006 con un titolo importante: Il silenzio del Buddha, un ateismo religioso. Quindi ha messo la privativa, ateismo religioso. Da notare questo sottotitolo perché è molto importante. Quindi questo testo di Raymond Panikkar è pregevole da vari punti di vista, intanto perché fa una sintesi del buddismo e perché poi lui inserisce quattro punti, quattro dottrine centrali, fondamentali del buddismo. La prima appunto è la non sostanzialità ontologica, la non ipostatizzazione di alcun principio identitario definitivo. Nulla è. E quindi anche la negazione dell'atoma. Il secondo concetto, il nirvana, si può tradurre con estinzione, liberazione. Il terzo è la concatenazione causale, originaria, costitutiva, la famosa Pratyasamutpada, e il quarto punto è per l'appunto il silenzio del Buddha sui quesiti metafisici allora discussi. Perché una cosa molto interessante che cercherò di commentare è che il Buddha non ha voluto dare nessuna risposta a tutta una serie di domande che all'epoca la metafisica buddista si faceva. E in particolare lui rifiutò di rispondere a 14 domande che all'epoca erano già proprio, come dire, catalogate, normatizzate. Queste 14 questioni irrisolte riguardavano il tempo, per l'appunto, lo spazio, l'esistenza dopo la morte e il rapporto tra l'anima e il corpo. Ve le leggo un po' in successione. È la dimensione temporale, quindi il tempo, è eterno, non eterno, entrambe o nessuna. La dimensione spaziale, lo spazio è finito, non finito, entrambi o nessuno. L'esistenza della morte, quindi il Tathagata, il soggetto che ha raggiunto la liberazione, l'illuminazione, esiste, cioè continua ad esistere, non esiste, esiste e non esiste, né esiste e né non esiste. Il quarto, rapporto tra anima e corpo, sono identici o differenti? Magari queste domande è bene dirle perché non mancano, come dire, i filosofi occidentali che considerano il pensiero indiano un po' di serie B, a partire insomma da Hegel, anche se poi si è ricreduto un po'. Quindi insomma sono domande importanti. Ora, perché il Buddha si è rifiutato di rispondere a queste domande? Le ragioni che possiamo ipotizzare sono diverse. Intanto per la limitatezza della ragione umana che comunque non può comprendere o comunque non può bene esprimere i misteri superiori. Secondo, perché la verità si vive, non la si concettualizza. Terzo, perché la realtà ultima non è, o quantomeno non è dal punto di vista dell'essere contingente, è non altro. Perché qualunque conoscenza nozionistica sarebbe comunque ininfluente ai fini della liberazione, cioè quello che conta è l'ortoprassi, la pratica. Perché eventuali nozioni avrebbero alimentato e moltiplicato fantasie e dibattiti. Perché le domande nascono sempre da due dimensioni negative, l'ignoranza e il desiderio. Ora, se ci pensiamo, effettivamente, una domanda esprime sempre desiderio e un ego. E qualunque desiderio, fosse anche il desiderio della liberazione, del nirvana, è l'ostacolo più grande per raggiungerlo. Perché questa ricerca suppone che ci sia un io che vuole raggiungere qualcosa, e finché c'è un io non si raggiunge il nirvana, perché il nirvana richiede la cancellazione dell'io. Altra possibile spiegazione, perché la domanda o le domande sono sempre mal poste o inopportune, perché le domande sono rivolte, sono fatte da persone che rivolgono queste domande al sapiente, persone che non hanno sperimentato, che non sanno quello che stanno chiedendo. E infatti il Buddha, a chi gli faceva questa domanda, nello specifico a Radha, diceva: Radha, tu non sai quello che domandi. Quindi, insomma, non rispondere a chi non ha mai sperimentato quelle realtà. L'ultima ipotesi è che in una domanda, in fondo, c'è sempre una violenza, no? Perché io quando faccio una domanda costringo qualcuno a rispondermi secondo i parametri della mia stessa domanda. Sono soltanto ipotesi del perché il Buddha non abbia risposto. In ogni caso, quindi, il Buddha ha voluto mettere in evidenza, dimostrare che quello che è essenziale è mettersi nella disposizione per cui la domanda non possa più sorgere. Cioè, l'assenza della domanda è la vera risposta. È a questo che deve, come dire, puntare il mistico, l'asceta. E per raggiungere questo stato non serve, tra virgolette, la filosofia, anche se poi i buddisti ne hanno fatta tanta, serve la pratica monastica. Ora, questa prospettiva ha sicuramente influenzato molto Raimund Panikkar, che il suo pensiero, la sua visione è caratterizzato da un apofatismo di fondo, anche se poi lo stesso Panikkar precisava che il silenzio non è il mutismo, sono due cose diverse. Da rimarcare, come accennavo, è la definizione che Panikkar dava di buddismo come ateismo religioso. È un paradosso, no? Perché voleva mettere in evidenza la differenza dall'Occidente, dove l'ateismo, diceva lui, è un antiteismo. E invece, secondo Panikkar, il buddismo è una religione, fra virgolette, atea, perché prende sul serio l'apofatismo, cioè prende sul serio, non nega Dio, ma prende sul serio il fatto che di Dio non si possa dire nulla. Questo mi sembra interessante, no? Dio come totalmente altro, come non altro. Ora, a scanso di equivoci, non è che la tradizione cristiana, soprattutto quella neoplatonica, non conosca l'apofatismo. Basta leggere la vita di Mosè di Gregorio di Nissa. Faccio presente che Gregorio di Nissa è quello che ha battezzato Plotino, no? L'apofatismo di Plotino, per cui l'uno è al di sopra dell'essere, è al di sopra del dualismo soggetto-oggetto, e quindi soggetto pensante e oggetto pensato, quindi l'uno non si può razionalizzare. Chi studia la mistica conosce queste dinamiche. E quindi la nostra tradizione neoplatonica porta traccia di questo apofatismo e non è un caso che anche maestro Eckhart parlava del vuoto. C'è una sua celebre frase che dice: prego Dio che mi liberi da Dio. Questa frase si basava sulla sua distinzione tra Gott e Gottheit, cioè tra una comprensione condizionata di Dio e una comprensione che rispetta la sua assolutezza, diciamo così. Quindi anche nel cristianesimo c'è questa idea di Dio come totalmente altro che non si può razionalizzare. Ecco, tornando a Panikkar, una caratteristica specifica del suo pensiero è proprio il rifiuto dell'equazione parmenidea tra essere e razionalità, cioè quello che è pensabile. Ecco, lui rifiuta questa prospettiva e infatti disegna un mondo a due livelli, no? Per cui c'è il logos e sopra il logos c'è il pneuma che va oltre il concetto di contraddizione. Il silenzio del Buddha, a prescindere da Panikkar, può avere una serie di spiegazioni, ma quella di fondo è pur sempre questo apofatismo, questo vuoto. Del vuoto. Se una cosa non è, non posso dire nulla, punto. Non posso usare il linguaggio, non posso usare le mie ragioni. Ora, questa dottrina del vuoto si appoggia, come dicevo, sulla negazione dell'Atman, sull'assenza di un sé individuale, sul principio che non esiste niente nel mondo che abbia un'identità propria, perché tutto è codipendente, cioè dipende, è in relazione a qualcos'altro. Questa è l'insostanzialità e l'impermanenza di ogni cosa reale. Non c'è niente di cui si possa dire qualcosa perché essenzialmente di stabile, di eterno, di sostanziale non c'è nulla. Ora, questa speculazione sul vuoto, quando è nata nel buddismo? È nata sicuramente già con i sermoni del Buddha, però soprattutto è nata quando sono stati, fra virgolette, riscoperti dei testi esoterici, diciamo così, che si chiamano Prajnaparamita Sutra. È una specie di corpus di testi che hanno appunto come focus, come oggetto centrale, la sapienza del vuoto, il concetto di vuoto. Il sutra più importante è quello del cuore, dove viene appunto formulata nel dettaglio la correlazione tra l'anatman, il non atman e il vuoto. Il principio di fondo, il contenuto principale di questo brevissimo sutra è che la realtà è fatta di aggregati che sono in relazione l'uno all'altro. Quindi il suo essere per sé, è un linguaggio un po' filosofico che c'è anche nella filosofia francese, no? Il suo essere per sé è essere per l'altro, il suo essere non è in sé, e proprio perché non c'è niente in sé è vuoto, tutto è per sé, in relazione a qualcos'altro, insostanzialità. La frase famosa contenuta nel Sutra del Cuore è questa: la vacuità è forma, la forma è vacuità. La vacuità non è distinta dalla forma, la forma non è distinta dalla vacuità. Ciò che è forma è vacuità, ciò che è vacuità è forma. Insomma, una frase un po' complicata che va spiegata un pochettino, no? Ora, la paradossale intuizione alla base di questa espressione è che il reale, il mondo che noi vediamo, è in realtà illusorio, è il concetto di Maya, perché ogni realtà deve appunto la sua forma alla relazione con qualcos'altro, al suo rapporto con qualcos'altro. Ora, proprio a motivo di questo la forma è vacuità, perché nasce da queste relazioni apparenti, diciamo così. Al tempo stesso però la vacuità è anche forma, perché la vacuità prende una forma. se no non la vedremmo, insomma. E perché in un certo senso corrisponde alla verità, perché è anche una potenza formante, perché cos'è che dà forma al mondo? Il karma. Il karma è verità, è una verità etica. No? La forma la forma è anche il destino, nasce dal karma. Ora, tra i filosofi buddisti che maggiormente hanno influenzato, hanno costruito anzi una filosofia su questa nozione, c'è Nagarjuna. E uno dei concetti base di Nagarjuna è che la realtà appunto è ineffabile, quindi va al di là del pensiero dualistico e di conseguenza non dobbiamo accettare nessun estremo di pensiero, né affermativo né negativo. Questo è un po' il messaggio centrale del suo libro più famoso, Il cammin di mezzo. Quindi quello che ha fatto Nagarjuna è inserire i sutra, della Prajnaparamita Sutra in genere, in una cornice più comprensibile, insomma, più ordinata, più razionale. La sua dottrina di mezzo significa essenzialmente che non si può sostenere nessuna affermazione dogmatica, ma vicino alle conclusioni. Secondo Nagarjuna, quindi, di una cosa non bisogna dire né che è vuota né che non è vuota, perché le parole non sono che una designazione metaforica. Ora, una domanda che potremmo porci, ma nel pensiero occidentale scenari simili ci sono? Beh, insomma, tutto sommato, certe frasi di Hegel nella scienza della logica, o l'Heidegger di cos'è la metafisica, o il Wittgenstein del trattato logico-filosofico, si prestano a dei collegamenti con queste intuizioni. Però, insomma, io non c'entro perché sennò sarebbe un'altra relazione. Quindi, in conclusione, visto che il tema del convegno è la conversione, che cos'è la conversione o metanoia per il buddismo? Semplicemente la consapevolezza o conoscenza del vuoto. Una volta che un individuo ha preso consapevolezza della insostanzialità dell'essere, si deve convertire per corollario logico. Ciò è tanto vero nella misura in cui l'attaccamento all'essere, cioè alla vita, all'io, oltre ad essere un'illusione, è una forma di sofferenza che determina il karma, la rinascita, quindi la schiavitù nello spazio-tempo. Ecco, quindi il Buddha semplicemente ha vissuto una conversione. Tuttavia la sua conversione è una conversione filosofica. Non è, come direbbe Guardini, una conversione ad una persona che ha identificato se stesso con la via, la verità e la vita. È una conversione ad una saggezza, ad una consapevolezza. Quindi una sintesi conclusiva è quella che si può ribadire che il vuoto è l'insegnamento fondamentale del Buddha e il silenzio è una diretta conseguenza di questo. Ma soprattutto una conclusione che dobbiamo trarre è la grande distanza che separa cristianesimo e buddismo. Perché il cristianesimo si fonda sul realismo, sulla creazione, sulla persona. È per questo che Jules Monchanin diceva: l'India rende l'amore un assurdo. Se volete poi la commentiamo questa frase. E da un punto di vista teologico il buddismo non può che sollevare questioni enormi. L'impersonalismo, il solipsismo, il pelagianesimo, l'idealismo, il quietismo, il nichilismo, l'assolutismo. Quindi è chiaro che è veramente difficile, se non impossibile, un dialogo teologico, però ecco, da questo punto di vista quello che possiamo dedurre è che c'è un lungo cammino da fare, perché il confronto con il buddismo sarà ancora molto lungo. Grazie.
Allora invito a parlare Judith Suchanek, ecco, spero di aver pronunciato bene. Forse conviene qui, io poi mi sposto, ecco, perché abbiamo sperimentato il problema con i microfoni. Ecco, ti presento semplicemente all'uditorio Ecco, è molto interessante perché abbiamo una filosofa e al tempo stesso una artista nel campo del canto, del campo musicale, quindi ci accompagnerà in una percezione del tema veramente nuova per molti di noi, sicuramente per me. Ecco, Judith ha studiato a Salisburgo, oltre che studiosa di filosofia, si è formata come cantante d'opera una formazione veramente interculturale evidente che oscilla tra sinologia, canto, filosofia, ecco, veramente molto interessante, quindi persona assolutamente competente a parlarci dell'esperienza della metanoia in Oriente, oltre alle sue attività concertistiche internazionali in Europa e in Cina. Parli 5 lingue e combina dialogo interculturale con arte e scienza nella sua ricerca. A te la parola.
Okay, yeah, now I can hear myself. So, very good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen, also from my side. I'm sorry that I have to talk to you in this condition because I've caught a cold the day before yesterday. And as you've heard, I come from a more practical background, and unfortunately, I'm not an expert on Guardini and neither on Buddhism, if you want. I have lived in China for more than 3 years, and I was also the director of the Chinese Study Center at the University of Salzburg, and I'm now at the Forum Asia Pacific of the University of Salzburg. And so I have a lot of intercultural experience, and the other background you have already heard from. So I thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you at this highly relevant and fascinating conference. Thank you all for being here to reflect on a silent revolution of knowledge. I would like to take you on a journey that does not destroy our understanding of knowledge, but places it in a larger, more holistic context. A journey that leads from the wisdom of the West to the East and back again. We live in a world that is increasingly connected, yet at the same time, people feel increasingly isolated. It is a world in which we know more about everything, except ourselves. My thesis today is simple. Many of our biggest problems nowadays, from political polarization to personal burnout, are primarily symptoms of psychological disorders and missing or misguided developments. What do we actually do when we want to understand the world? Imagine a surveyor, equipped with tools such as a theodolite, a measuring rod, and GPS. He traverses the landscape, measuring, triangulating, and transferring his data to a map. The result is precise, objective, and useful. With this map, we can build roads and draw boundaries. But does this map ever correspond to the experience of standing in this landscape, smelling the damp morning dew, feeling the warm sun on your skin, and hearing the silence? The map captures the quantity, but it ignores the quality of the experience. Today, I would like to venture the thesis that many of our global crises, from political polarization to ecological alienation, can be traced back to the fact that we rely too much on maps and have forgotten how to navigate the landscape. What do we do when we engage in philosophy or scientific research? We set out like surveyors. Using the tools of logic and empiricism, we create a map of reality, especially in the natural sciences. Precise, useful, magnificent. The methods of Western philosophy and other sciences, logic, empiricism, discourse, we have created an invaluable map of our world and our thinking. Nevertheless, in order to truly understand the full depth and breadth of human experience, we should also pursue other paths of knowledge. What deeply troubles me, for example, is the realization that so many of our social problems have their roots in the psychic realm, and yet we refuse to address them there. Whether in politics or in our public institutions, we fight the symptoms but shy away from addressing the actual psychic causes. I would like to give an example from the field of music. Like most people, I'm convinced that a purely musicological understanding of a work completely misses the point. You can analyze every fugue, deconstruct every harmony, but the true essence of music is only revealed to those who are willing to feel it, or as I would rather say, to sense it, to allow themselves to be touched by it. The same applies to any human experience. Pure analysis is not enough. We must learn to perceive ourselves and the world around us more deeply. What we need is a metanoia in the original sense of the word, a fundamental reversal of our thinking and perception, a silent revolution of knowledge, or rather, in a broader sense, of awareness. Today, I would like to highlight Eastern traditions in this context. My lecture is divided into 4 parts. First, I will focus on the wisdom traditions of the East and the West, in particular Buddhism, Taoism, and Christian mysticism, and the question of how they point the way to deep self-knowledge or self-awareness, and inner freedom by overcoming the illusion of the separate self and through the practice of meditation and contemplation. The second part examines how access to the hidden depth of our unconscious through psychoanalysis, meditation, and contemplation enables a genuine metanoia, and how contemplative practices help to tap into implicit knowledge and promote the holistic understanding. Finally, we will see how a contemplative turn is already bringing about a new synthesis in modern science and philosophy. The fourth part highlights how the development of an integrated personality in harmony with wisdom traditions such as Buddhism and Taoism enables inner harmony, presence, and a balance between individuality and connectedness. The presentation leads to one conclusion: a new Enlightenment 2.0 is needed. Part 1. From the wave to the ocean. Wisdom traditions as a path to self-knowledge and liberation. In many ways, Buddha could be considered an early psychologist. His teachings offer an extremely precise model of consciousness that describes how thoughts, feelings, and perceptions arise and pass away in a constant flow, and how we mistakenly identify with them. According to Buddhism, the concept of non-self, anatta, is not a nihilistic teaching, but a liberating insight. We are not prisoners of our thoughts or feelings. This understanding, combined with practical methods such as mindfulness and meditation, makes Buddhist psychology a profound and timeless approach to understanding the human mind. We should recognize contemplation, intuition, and the systematic cultivation of awareness as legitimate and essential methods of knowledge if we strive for a more holistic understanding of the world and of ourselves. Fortunately, we have ancient and sophisticated maps for this inner landscape, and we find them in both the East and the West. They just speak different languages. Here, we will first turn to 2 great wisdom traditions that can be understood not only as religions, but also as practical psychology. Buddhism speaks of the illusion of a separate self. We experience ourselves as isolated individuals. like a wave that forgets that it is also part of the ocean. This metaphor is very well known in this tradition. This illusion feeds competitive thinking and separation from the whole. Buddhism, on the other hand, invites us to explore the mind and see through the illusory nature of a fixed self, a liberation to connectedness. Its radical insight, our fixed I, is a processual composite event, a wave in the ocean of consciousness. Like a wave in the ocean, it has a certain form, but its essence is flowing, connected water. This insight of anatta, not self, is not destructive, but in the eyes of Buddhism, a liberation insofar as it frees us from the illusion of a fixed, unchanging self, and thus removes the basis for our suffering. It enables a life of connectedness and serenity. Another important wisdom tradition in the East, especially of course in China, Taoism, focuses not on the mind but on the flow of life. Its ideal is wu wei, non-action. It is about acting and non-acting in harmony with the natural course of things. It is the psychology of right timing. And another goal is ziran, being natural, or being oneself. The return to our spontaneous, authentic nature when we shed the artificial mask of conformity or other influences. Both traditions tell us your deepest identity is not the individual wave, but the entire ocean. These traditions are practical guides to self-knowledge and offer precisely the tools that are often Cartesian-minded West lacks: mindfulness, contemplation, and the training of perception. But let us not forget our own roots. The West has its own rich traditions of contemplative insights. We've just heard of Meister Eckhart, the Christian mysticism of Meister Eckhart, who spoke of the birth of God in the soul, or Teresa of Avila, who described the chambers of the inner castle. These are cartographic masterpieces of inner experience. However, this is not about pure reflection, but about the transformative encounter with the divine, which is in everything and unites everything. The apparent contradiction resolves itself. The ocean of the East and the personal God of the West are different metaphors for, perhaps, the same incomprehensible reality. A reality that lies beyond our conceptual maps and is accessible only through experience. Together, these traditions show us that to achieve true metanoia, we need access to the deeper layers of our being, to the unconscious, to embodied knowledge, to the patterns that unconsciously drive us. Meditation in both Buddhism and Christian contemplation is a central tool for exploring these depths. This is not esoteric speculation, but a phenomenological method for directly exploring the landscape of our own consciousness. Part 2. The hidden depths of being, access to the unconscious and the power of implicit knowledge. You are all familiar with the image of an iceberg. We are like an iceberg, the tip of which represents our conscious thinking, but the massive, invisible part below the surface of the water, the unconscious, determines our motives, fears, and reactions, among other things, and influences our entire behavior. And here lies the crucial point. To achieve genuine metanoia and inner transformation, we need access to this unconscious. As long as we are blindly controlled by these hidden forces, we remain prisoners of our own patterns. This is precisely where the paths converge. Psychoanalysis attempts to create access through language and interpretation. Meditation and contemplation, on the other hand, open this access through silence and pure perception. In doing so, both seem to seek the same thing: the path to the sources of our being, to be healed and become whole from within. And here, in the spirit of Romano Guardini's Der Gegensatz, the whole depth is revealed. It is not a question of either or between these paths, but of both and, or as well as. In the East, Buddhism and Taoism developed sophisticated methods for diving directly into the stream of consciousness through mindfulness and physical exercises. In the West, depth psychology explored the depths of the soul, while Christian mysticism and prayer sought a contemplative approach to the divine within. All these traditions recognize that true metanoia, the turning of the heart, begins with bringing the hidden depth of our being to light. Now I will give you an example of an approach in the so-called West that goes in this direction. The power of implicit knowledge. The science theorist Michael Polanyi coined the phrase, "We can know more than we can say." So-called implicit knowledge, or tacit knowledge, is fundamental to our actions and understandings, but cannot be fully captured in explicit theories. Our rational discursive reason is only the tip of a huge iceberg of silent knowledge. Contemplative practices are like dives to explore this iceberg. They make the implicit more accessible and train our ability to tap into this intuitive intelligence. Holism versus reductionism. The analytical method is excellent for breaking things down, but its strength is also its weakness. It tends towards reductionism. The quality of interpersonal relationships, ethical decisions, or aesthetic experiences is lost when we break them down into their constituent parts. Intuitive and contemplative knowledge often aims at a holistic, relational understanding that is embedded in a context. Part 3. The contemplative turn, a new synthesis. The integration of science, philosophy, and practice. This synthesis is not a theoretical construct. It is already being practiced. In some respects, we are already experiencing a contemplative turn in science and philosophy. For example, in the philosophy of mind and cognitive science. Leading thinkers such as Evan Thompson or Francisco Varela, co-founder of the research field of neurophenomenology, advocate close dialogue between Western science and contemplative traditions. The philosopher Evan Thompson calls this investigative phenomenology. In his work, Waking, Dreaming, Being, Self, and Consciousness in Neuroscience, Meditation, and Philosophy, Thompson revolutionarily combines Buddhist philosophy with modern neuroscience. Thompson argues that we cannot understand consciousness if we only view it from the outside. Instead, Buddhism teaches us to explore consciousness from within, through the systematic training of mindfulness. The mind becomes both the investigating subject and the investigated object. Okay, I understand. Maybe I have to skip something soon. This approach breaks with a deeply rooted prejudice of modernity, the separation of the investigating subject from the investigated world. It propagates a reunification of theory and practice, of the knower and the known. This approach is deeply in tune with Romano Guardini's idea of der Gegensatz, the tension between opposites. Guardini saw this tension not as a problem to be solved, but as a dynamic space of relationship in which opposites remain unmixed yet united. Sorry, I just have to check what I'm going to skip. So I will just skip a few examples that I've prepared. Maybe I would like to mention that there is one important institution in China where contemplative practice is recognized as a research method for experiencing concepts, and this is the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, for short CAS, in Beijing. And then I would have told you something about CAS and also about a very famous professor, Zhang Xianglong, from Peking University, who is also influenced by the CAS tradition. And so I will skip this. And I would have told you something about integrated personality, but okay. Just to stay in my time frame. Maybe I may add that in my own practice of meditation and martial arts, I've learned that integration is not about perfection, but about presence, about being fully in the moment and in the dynamic interplay of mind, body, and soul. We must be capable of both. The powerful individuality of the wave and the connected vastness of the ocean. This is at the heart of the silent revolution, the integration of the apparent contradiction between I and we. My conclusio. Enlightenment 2.0, metanoia and inner transformation. What does all this mean? It means the beginning of a new stage of enlightenment. The first enlightenment freed us from external authorities. The Enlightenment 2.0, to which I invite you, frees us from the internal authority of a misunderstood self. It gives us greater inner freedom and liberates us through conscious being. While the first enlightenment taught us to think about the world, the second enlightenment teaches us to experience the world and ourselves directly and to reflect on it and on ourselves. For only when we gain access to our unconscious patterns, we can truly act freely, instead of merely react. This metanoia enables us to tackle problems where they originate, in the depth of our consciousness, or rather, in our unconscious, and consequently, in our relationships and in our relationship to the world. It is an invitation to a global culture of inner practice, to train self-reflection to better understand our inner selves and our actions, our often destructive patterns and all the consequences associated with them. Developing sensitivity to feel the wisdom of the body and the heart. Cultivating silence, to listen in contemplation to the voice within ourselves that lies beyond all words. To cultivate a methodological openness that combines the cartographic precision of the West with the traditional ways of the East and the mysticisms of all traditions. This does not mean turning away from reason or replacing logic with intuition. On the contrary, it is about a reason of expanded possibilities. It is about the insight that knowledge is multidimensional. This revolution is silent because it begins in the silence of our own consciousness. In his work Der Gegensatz, Romano Guardini speaks of metanoia, a change of mind, a transformation of perception. In the sense of Romano Guardini's, der Gegensatz. It is not a question, as I said, of either or, but both and. We must be able to do both. Analyze the map precisely and feel ourselves. This is the core of the silent revolution of knowledge. The realization that true understanding does not arise from choosing between opposites, but from their creative tension. Contemplative change shows that a quiet revolution of knowledge is underway. It invites us to become humbler, to acknowledge that our cartographic methods are incomplete, and it invites us to become more courageous, to engage in direct, trained experiences. It calls on us not only to think about the world, but to experience it in a new, deeper, and more holistic way. Physicist Werner Heisenberg once said, "The first sip from the glass of science makes you an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting." Perhaps we can say, the first sip from the cup of philosophy leads to logic and analysis. But at the bottom, we find the realization that we ourselves are the most important instrument for experiencing the world. Let's start by tuning this instrument. It challenges us not only to think about the world, but to experience ourselves and the world in a new, deeper, and more holistic way. Sorry, this is repetition. We must not only think and understand, but also experience to truly know. To express this in a more poetic way, this silent revolution begins in our hearts, but its waves will spread across the whole world. This metanoia, this reversal of heart and mind, would enable us to address the problems of this world at the level where they originate from, and ideally lead to a truly more peaceful coexistence. Let us begin this journey of metanoia, this silent revolution, together. Thank you very much.
Ecco, e invito la dottoressa Hu Yeping. Did I pronounce well? Okay. Bene. La dottoressa Hu è filosofa.
I like to stand.
May I introduce you?
Okay, thank you.
È una filosofa della cultura, si interessa di dialogo tra le civiltà e le culture, quindi quanto mai benvenuta nel nostro dialogo. In particolar modo ha accompagnato gli studi del padre MacLean attraverso una serie anche di pubblicazioni scientifiche nel contesto da ultimo per esempio del Dipartimento di Filosofia dell'Università di Toronto, con studiosi provenienti da vari paesi e includendo il tema del significato della vita, la consapevolezza del sé e il dialogo interculturale. Ci propone una riflessione sul non io come compassione.
I hope after the Italian introduction, everyone already know who I am. And they say the last, the best. I hope. And I have a whole evening for myself. And I will take all the time. You have my paper, so I'm not going to read it. And if you like, you can read it. I just speak. And Ivan asked me to send a PowerPoint. I said I never made a PowerPoint, make my hand notes. Okay. And so I will get...
Try to use if possible 20 minutes.
20 minutes. Oh, I just talk and you stop me at 20 minutes. Okay. No, not violently, huh? Since we are talking about Buddhism. I know it's late. I want to make fun, a story, and I want to tell something just from my own reflection, because Buddhism Ivan asked me to present a paper on Buddhism. I'm a Chinese, but unfortunately, I was trained in Western philosophy. And my professor, Olga Jaborowski, and I took a couple of his class this year. So I'm very honored, huh? And the question about metanoia, I started from the last. Metanoia is saying a Greek word, and the people say it's a Western notion. Is that true? The word is Greek, but doesn't mean that other cultures or other philosophical traditions do not have such thinking and ideas. So we might use another word to another concept to explain this metanoia. Ivan asked me to say something about Buddhism. I never studied Buddhism, and I used 2 months to self-taught myself what is Buddhism. And so is the millions of books, articles have been published. I said, what should I say? I just have to restate. I give some restatement and reflection on what I learned with my own understanding. What is Buddhism? As Ivan was saying, this is encounter. That's why we had a round table style this morning. And I thought to myself, I'm the best example of cultural encounter. People ask me, what is your religion? I said, it is a good question. Because there are 2 persons have strong influence on me. One is my mother. I don't know where he is. She's in heaven or nirvana somewhere. She was a Buddhist, practiced Buddhist, but never studied Buddhism. And every day, in the morning, noon, and evening, she had a time. She had a little shrine, and with all these statues, and meditation, chanting, etc. The other person had a strong influence on me is Father George McLean, and of course, she was a Catholic. So this Buddhism and Catholicism had a strong influence in me. And so I said, well, there's 2 religion, you see, you can see it's religion or culture or philosophy are embedded in myself, even though I learned the Western philosophy later in my life. So I think that this is a good example to see, and then I say I'm ecumenical, because I want to learn the best of these 2 traditions, and what are the best, and then it's not just theoretically, we live our life. Buddhism is not only a religion or philosophy, it's a way of life. And if you only talk conceptually, metaphysics or epistemology or that, and to my mother, she would not understand at all. But she was a wonderful person with a compassionate heart. And this, at the same time, paradoxically, she paid party dues because she was a Communist Party member. And there's very common phenomena in China. You pay your political party due, at the same time you practice your religious belief. And it's possible if you go to a temple, like in my hometown, there's a temple. You see the Buddhist statue, Taoist statue, and Confucius statue in the same temple. But it's impossible for the monotheism, Abrahamic faith. So I don't know whether we can learn something. Even the Abrahamic faith have the same origin, but the brother fight is still there. It's still reality today. And how can we avoid that such thing? And can we learn something from other traditions, as the previous speaker just mentioned? And what is the concept of God? And in Chinese, we use heaven, tian. And tian means the absolute. This absolute, you can see, is different, of course, definitely different in the Trinitarian God. But then doesn't mean that they don't believe something transcendent. And this transcendent force is in our life, and you live it with the love, with the fear, or whatever you have. That depends on you, as you mentioned, your own circumstances, your upbringing. I was reflecting about the meaning of death, because Guardini is interested in the three deaths of the three first figures. Why? What the meaning of the death of Buddha, Socrates, and Christ? I think probably is trying to, through their death, to awaken us, and the millions of people, to search for something, or truth, or goodness, or beauty, whatever you say. And we can only we define it. As you mentioned, Taoism. Tao, what is Tao? If you name it, it's no longer Tao. So, what is God? If we name it, and God is this, or either affirmative or negative. And is that God? I don't know. So this is the one thing. The other thing about suffering. If Christ on the cross is suffering, radical suffering, for what? For salvation, for saving all humanity. And then the Buddhism also talking about suffering. And what is that suffering? It's also a liberation. It's a freedom. So if we find some similarities, this suffering, I think, is the point to look at it. The other day we had a meeting talking about the problem, political, social, environmental. It used a Buddhist term. It's human suffering. And the suffering is our condition. And we cannot escape. As soon as the human start in this world, we have some record. It's always conflicts, wars, sufferings, and those sufferings. What is the cause for the suffering? That's uniquely. That's what the Buddhism is trying to look at, and it's from a unique angle. My paper is talking about non-self, and the two before me already mentioned about non-self. And what is non-self? That's what my first part about my paper. Now I'm back to my paper. Is what is non-self. The second part about the liberation. The third part is compassion and loving kindness. And the non-self, as you mentioned, is, according to Buddhism, I understand, is the true self. And the self is not negation or just removing, destroying self. Is to look for the true self this non-self is why it's to say the non-self is true self, because if we look, this is the first. We need to look at the first teaching of a Buddha after he got the enlightenment under the Buddha tree. Is the Four Noble Truths. Very basic, but we have to start to understand. If we want to understand the human condition, the Four Noble Truths, the first one is suffering. The second, the cause of suffering. The third is the stop of the suffering. The fourth is the way, the path to this extinction of suffering. So then if we look at this noble truth, or this reality or conditions of a humankind, and we see, we can understand what does non-self means. We all know what suffering means, but we have to say what, and the cause of suffering is a craving, desire. But what kind of things we desire? We're craving, we attach. First thing we attach, we crave, we desire is ourself. And we want to preserve ourselves. Medically, we try to live 100 years, biologically 100 years. And all these research to find a way to prolong our life. So this biological, so self-preservation now is fundamental thing for our existence. So this is the first thing we have to say. What is the thing we want to desire for? What we desire for is ourself. And so precisely from this ourself, and the Buddhism try to look, don't attach yourself, because the attachment, the craving or desiring to yourself is the cause of the suffering. So that's the selfishness. That's what we are talking about, consumer society. That's the cause of the selfishness, because our attachment to the self. So this is the first sermon, and the Buddha's first teaching. And the second, the second teaching, the Four Noble, second teaching after, to his 5 original disciples, is the doctrine of non-self. So what does that mean in Buddhism, the self? I think this morning Holger was talking, if we want to get rid of this physical, material thing, self, and not this spiritual self. That's, I think, similar to Buddhism. What Buddhism is saying, the self, is 5 aggregates, 5 things: feeling, form, perception, mental formation, and consciousness. These 5 things change all the time. Me, for example, I have big form. Before I'm a 1.7, now I'm a 160. Because I changed, my form changed, my perception changed, my feeling changed according to different time, and my consciousness changes. So this thing we attach, and because these things impermanent, is changing all the time and becoming not in the fixed form, but we attach it, we think it's permanent. That's the problem. So now we'll find this problem, then don't attach it. It's not easy to do it, not attach it. So I think that's the problem in our day. And if we look at that, I have a lot of elaborate in the paper. You can read it. So in that sense, the doctrine of non-self in Buddhism provides a very special angle to understand who we are. That is metaphysics issue. Is who we are is a being, talking about being. And we are not just a physical, the 5 aggregates, being, all the physical, psychological organism, we're non-being. And what this kind of a non-being is? That this non-being for Buddhism is the non-self is the self. So non-self is the self, is the true nature of self, and each of us has that true nature of self, and that true nature of self is selflessness. That's the being, that's the true being, and then that's what we want strive for. At least I have a very elaborate series on this explanation of how to get rid of the being and the true, become a true self, and etc. I think the first one talked about the Nagarjuna metaphysics, the Buddhism. According to that, it's one of the Mahayana Buddhism. There's 8 consciousness in our brain, in our mind, and the first 6 just look at the data, and then the seventh consciousness to analyze and then make that the data conceptualize this data, and then 8th consciousness is the very interesting. Is unconsciousness. It's the storehouse. It's a storage to store these possibilities, which can become non-self or a self. So for Buddhism, transformation of a consciousness is important for transformation of self. And that transformation, because we misunderstand this physical data, sense data, as something real. That's the problem. So then we need, it's very complicated, and then so we should get rid of that thing, that's impermanent, etc. So in that sense, Buddhism corrects nihilism by affirming the true self, and then correct this dogmatism by teaching non-self. So non-self and self is the one. It is the same thing, because the true self, non-self, is the true self. And it's not the negation of self. It's not the problem of self. It's not the problem of consciousness. It's the problem. The problem is our misunderstanding, identifying the physical things as the real thing. And then you can see this real metaphysical issue. And that's what Suzuki, the well-known Japanese scholar, says. Buddhism is about metaphysics. It's about non-being, non-self. And it's understand who we are. So, according to Buddha's teaching, the third noble truth, we can find a way to get out from this problem, suffering. That's nirvana. Talking about liberation. And what is liberation or salvation? And it's so many materials on nirvana. And what is nirvana? Nirvana, my understanding, is action. It's a ethical, spiritual act. It's not just to stay there peacefully and quietly, isolatedly, but it's action. You need to act in order to make effort to reach that state. And so, for Buddhism, this nirvana is a place. It's a place where we know our true nature as a non-self. And it is an invitation to all to join the effort, to make your effort to reach that state. And it's advocates a human responsibility. It's your responsible. It's our responsibility to get out of the suffering of this human condition, the miserable condition. If we don't do anything, we pray or meditate, or somehow we can get the divine help. But then if we don't do anything, we can't reach that state. So it's an invitation, and it's a place opening up to allow compassion, love, kindness into your heart, your consciousness, and to live in a concrete life. And it is a turning point towards the space people live together as a care, with the care and with love. So this is very concrete. It's not abstract notion. It's not only ethical place where people will have our moral responsibility, ethical responsibility. It's also a spiritual place for a deeper and a total awakening. And what is that? We probably each one has his, her own experience in that sense. We reach that state, that enlightenment state, doesn't mean we live away from our daily life. But we know more intensity and the universality of a human condition, suffering. And we already changed our attitude, not self-centered, but instead we have this compassion, because this nirvana opened up our heart, our mind, our consciousness to another possibility, another path. And this new path, with the compassion and the loving kindness, is where we strive for. Otherwise, we continue to have this suffering, continue to have this misery in our life. And it's not easy to do that, according to Buddhism. What to do? We have to train ourselves. So that's why the fourth noble truth is called eightfold path. Right seeing. The first one is seeing, and the second one, right knowing, right action, right understanding, etc. Wisdom. So seeing with wisdom's eye is important. Is rather than without seeing, there's no knowing. And seeing is foundation, is what knowing has to go through. Without seeing, there's no knowledge. That's according to Buddhism. Suzuki said very well about that. So seeing is with not just regular eyes with the glasses. If I take my glass, I can't see. It's a wisdom eye. It's a special eye to see. And then we can know that's the true knowledge, whether it's a true knowledge or not true knowledge. And otherwise, everything is knowledge. I wrote this thing. It's kind of a knowledge about Buddhism. I'm not sure. But I have to use this wisdom intuition, wisdom eye, to see it. And then I understand it. So, 1 minute. No, finish. No, I still finish. So now I conclude. Nirvana, enlightenment, is not about myself, oneself. It's not about talking, make us feel good. Oh, it's not about theory, it's action. It's moral action, spiritual action, and with is you have to have this foundation of to act. That foundation is compassion, and without compassion, and compassion is the foundation of meditation for Buddhism. Without compassion, what you're talking about is fake. Thank you very much.
Ecco, riprendiamo questa intensa attività con il reverendo Robert Flanagan, docente al Virginia Theological Seminary negli Stati Uniti, operante a New York dove è cappellano del seminario teologico. Il suo campo di studi è la teologia mistica e la mistica in generale, in particolar modo insistendo sul misticismo del XIV secolo. Prego.
Grazie. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you to Yvonne for having me. I'm delighted after all these years once again be back with Yvonne and be with you all, and to meet some of you for the first time in person as opposed to online. This is lovely. And so I am not William Barberary, and if I had my sign out, it would be Robert Flanagan, and you'd expect a Irish Jesuit to be speaking with you, but I am not either of those. I have a very typical American background. My father was a Roman Catholic, and my mother was Baptist, and they got together, married in the Catholic Church, and then after a while, like a lot of good New England Catholics, my father stopped going to church, and we wound up, when I was quite young, in the Episcopal Church, which I was raised in. So I am, yes, one of the few Irish-American Episcopalian priests, which is quite the amusement to many at times. Since my paper is shorter, I will give you this story because I think it's late enough in the day, buonasera, that I can give you this. That my wife is half Irish and half Italian, but really half Sicilian. So another American, very American story, and she would go to, after I was a priest and being a married priest, so she would go to a job, or she'd be at her job, or she'd be shopping in a store or somebody, and somebody would come up to her and say, they would be talking, and they'd ask, oh, well, what does your husband do? And she'd say, oh, I'm married to Father Flanagan. At which point, if that person was typically a lapsed Catholic, and the blood would drain from their face, and they would wonder, I haven't been to church in a long time. I think I need to get back, because I think some things have changed since I went to church last. So I am both a well-grounded Protestant, probably the only one in the room, but an American Protestant, maybe some others, and then also in a tradition that is very, very much apostolic. So the Episcopal Church has those roots, and I think that's important. Just as you hear me talk, I often will look out when I'm giving a paper, and there'll be some Jesuits in the room, and they'll look at me like, what did you just say? So that may happen this afternoon. You may look at me and say, how did he come up with that, and what theology was that? And just remember, an Episcopalian with a Baptist mother and a Catholic father. So I have some quirks that you may see. Let me begin with it in my introduction, and I'll just go through the paper as is for you. Romano Guardini's contraposition thinking folds neatly into ecumenism, as stated in the conference description. This mode of thinking also addresses epistemological self-realization and individualization theories when applied to Guardini's concept of transformation, transformational metanoia, and unchanging gestalt, and the countervailing tensions between them in the intra-empirical opposition section of Der Gegensatz. And at its core, his metanoia and gestalt thinking assists humans in becoming the true self with creative, intellectual, and courageous thriving. In my presentation, I will argue that the current crisis in education and Western culture are, on the one hand, a crisis of unchangeability brought about by a calcified sense of self, as evidenced in political extremism and cancel culture, and equally by a crisis of constantly changing relativism due to an overemphasis on the concept of transformation, as illustrated in moral relativism. Drawing on ancient Greek philosophical teachings, Guardini's metanoia and gestalt theory is one of three polarities within the empirical realm. By it, we can understand life as a dynamic process of metanoia through growth or decay occurring in the river of time and space. Guardini states that we experience our life as metanoia, perceived through bodily and worldly movement. He observes that we experience ourselves and life as retaining their original character, composition, and wholeness, yet also as constant change within time and space. He notes that the space we experience is a dynamic movement. He calls it vivid and lively, and it is realized only through action. Guardini's gestalt, the gestalt is fundamental structure and form that underlies ideas, thinking, and life itself. It is the immutable, solidified ground that gives form and satisfaction. The gestalt is the identity that supports mental health and assured awareness of the rational and irrational by providing a reliable structure and sense of the self. He adds that the gestalt allows us to experience ourselves as something enduring, retaining a sameness amid change, a persistent steadiness through the river of time and space. The gestalt is also the predictable human form and a certain world. It is awakening to a body's resembling yesterday's body, to predictable growth and aging, and to existence's inevitable decay. The gestalt is also located in the ancient Ionic columns dotting Rome and the fidelity of a friend's familiar smile. The tension between, a tension, however, exists between the metanoia and the gestalt. Each longs to draw the person closer. We want certain days never to end, and other nights we long for the morning. Yet, as Guardini notes, neither metanoia or gestalt exists in perfection or as an absolute. Transformation or metanoia cannot be unadulterated. Static or stasis is not realized purely. The former causes chaos, and the latter causes calcification. Thus, pressure and counter-pressure pull against each other, allowing for structure and movement to continue. Guardini observes that the act of standing is a kind of pressure, as is the force against it. A rock standing in the middle of the river is both fixed and moving. It is a break against the waters of time and space, and slowly, continuously shaped and formed and smoothed by the force of water against it. Guardini's metanoia and Gestalt concept has mystical ties. The 14th century English mystic Walter Hilton and Julian of Norwich employ the idea to illustrate how a person can change more into divine likeness and how God's presence within the soul is changeless. For Hilton, transformation and metanoia are part of the process of reforming the soul. Hilton states that reforming can be complete while living only in part. Excuse me, let me say that again. Hilton states that reforming can be complete while living only in part, and it is incumbent on belief in Jesus Christ and takes much time. Complete earthly reforming is impossible. Hilton observes the loathing of sin and for the full forsaking in will of the soul for the love of Jesus, meaning that the complete giving over of the soul to the love in Jesus and a turning of heart to him. Those are what the three pieces that Hilton wants someone to experience in metanoia. Hilton notes that reforming does not occur without metanoia. The transformation that Hilton calls turning gives the Christian the strength and grace to withstand the stirring of sin. Mystical metanoia allows the stone to withstand the river's pressure so that, as Guardini observes, the Gestalt remains. Like Hilton, Julian sees transformation as central to the spiritual life. She states, with great contrition, with compassion, and with a true longing for God, people are freed from sin and suffering, which is the start of transformation. One cannot achieve the metanoia or state of being that Julian observes during our earthly existence. She writes that while all manners of things are ready for us in heaven, the fullness of joy cannot be complete while we live on earth. Julian understands that our souls can never rest in things which are beneath it, meaning earthly things, but it must act to rise above earthly concerns. And in that process of rising is forever a metanoia. Within the time and space, Julian sees no rest or stasis, but rather a longing to be with God in heaven. Hilton views the soul as spiritual, immortal, and unchangeable. The static nature of the soul comes from its reforming. Like many mystics, Hilton distinguishes the flesh and its lower nature from the soul and its potential higher nature, which can receive God's indwelling. A soul reformed is fair, and an unreformed soul is foul. A reformed soul can be at peace, which is a spiritual nature of stasis and unchangeability, once a soul has changed, it resembles the likeness of God and then can know and love God. The experience of internal changelessness is best seen in Julian's writings. She writes, "In spite of our ignorant way of life and our blindness here, our kind Lord everlastingly watches our behavior and rejoices. So, through God's providence, have we been known and loved in his everlasting purpose, since before time began. And in this love, without beginning, he protects us and never allows us to be so harmed that our bliss would be less." Julian's expression of hope arises from the unchangeability of the interior self that is static because God makes it so. Her understanding of the immutability of the soul is grounded in God's love, which gives her stability. Hilton and Julian's awareness of the metanoia of the human spirit, the soul's static nature, do point to attention. Julian writes, "In our essential being we are complete, and in our sensory being we are lacking. But God will remedy this by making mercy and grace flow abundantly into us from his own natural goodness." Hilton adds, "There are many devout souls that feel the knowing of themselves and yet do not fully they do not know fully what it is. And that knowing in part hinders them. These mystics are acutely aware of the tension between the static, the soul resting in God, and the changing nature by time and space. The mystics identify what pulls from the Gestalt as sinful. What pulls from the Gestalt is sinful and worldly because it lacks permanence. Hilton and Julian also acknowledge that resting in complete peace with God is unattainable. The completeness is unattainable. The resolution of the tension will occur in heaven or at Christ's second coming. The recognition of Julian's metanoia and Gestalt helps Christians discover their true self. However, Guardini is not advocating for the adage, "know thyself." He is instead pointing to self-knowledge through an understanding of the tension between the metanoia and the Gestalt. They are in relationship and cannot exist without each other. The tension between them helps a person develop a better sense of self and a creative spirit and answers the question, who I am. It's in the tension between the two that oneself, the relationship between the two, that oneself understands who I am. One always discovers the answer in relationship and the tension between them. One also finds that the depth of the self is limitless and the ability to transform is endless, achieving their fullness only with God's grace in heaven. Thank you.
Ma veramente devo introdurre Yvonne, ecco. Va bene, che cosa ingrata. Sei un faro per noi, va bene, che ci ospiti in questa università dove insegni da tanti anni. Tu stai facendo un lavoro interdisciplinare, tu sei l'interdisciplinarità, perché in realtà è una giurista. Ecco, va bene, non ho parole, veramente, sono solo grato a tutto ciò che sei, che rappresenti, e proprio si vede con queste iniziative. Ecco, quindi non ho altro da dire se non lasciarti la parola, perché torniamo a un tema che abbiamo in realtà già trattato un po' stamattina, e quindi sarà bello sentire questa idea della ferita che provoca, o del morso che è provocato dalla riflessione, dalla contemplazione. Prego.
Grazie, grazie mille per le parole, proprio per stare qui insieme. I don't know if it's very provocative what I will say now, because in the context of what we heard before. Okay, I start. Are we still capable of love and relationship today? This reveals the entire problem of our modernity, so the throwaway society, as more and more people attribute only the objective character to things and deny their subjectivity. We believe we can simply throw away things and destroy them as we want. And as people are increasingly degraded to objects, and as objects they are only used and utilized for a specific purpose, profound encounters are becoming increasingly difficult and even rare. I just throw that like this as a thesis. And Guardini says that it's not technology, today we speak about digital turn, artificial intelligence, but our use of it and the increasing power associated with technology that is making us increasingly incapable of relationships. So I'm talking here about relationships, about how to relate, and Guardini's earliest texts are dedicated to a specific relationship. He wrote the first three texts on a relationship, and this is art. So he tried to relate himself to art, and he tried to explain why art is relationship. A book on Michelangelo, what is an artist, and then a lecture on the nature and the being of a work of art, and the text on the observer. So we also know the role of the work of art and the artist for the understanding of his Weltanschauung, so the understanding, the comprehension of the world. But I've always been very fascinated, and tonight I want to try to get in touch with that by the fact that things had such an important meaning to Guardini. Things, not objects. We always talk about the theology of things. In the book Der Gegensatz, Guardini goes even a step further. So he particularly emphasizes an element that plays a crucial role in the context of art and knowledge and things. So Guardini asserts that we need a connection to things in order to conduct science. So without things, and without relating with things, we cannot even do science. That's what I try to understand tonight. Guardini, he writes, within, so I have the German part and then the translation. Within the entire realm of what is given, we find the fact of the structure of contrapositions. Ultimately, its meaning lies in the fact that the structure in contrapositions is the structure of the living concrete. So the task, therefore, he writes, will be to elaborate, I took it from his book, Der Gegensatz, elaborate on the fact of the concrete, to demonstrate its inherent problems, and to point out a way in which it can be conceptually grasped. He goes on and writes, 160, Our thinking has forgotten that it stands before things. They are concrete realities. It seems as if concepts are the actual things of scientific work. As if it's had to start with the concept, remain within the concept, manipulate concepts, and then ultimately deliver conceptual analysis of concepts. The idea of contrast, of the opposition, as an essential way of doing justice to the concrete, can be a constant reminder to start with the thing, to open our eyes to the particular fact of the concrete thing and to form concepts from it. End of quotation. This is from the Gegensatz. Guardini thus developed a method of which the concrete must always be present. Presence, present, what we said this morning. This is truly revolutionary. Even today, it would be like recognizing Laudato Si, so the protection of the landscape, as an origin of thinking. Pope Francis has followed precisely this path, so that we become a work, a thing, in community and encounter. Guardini develops a kind of, I call it, a thing metaphysics, a thing empirical science, a thing intuition. It's only, I try to touch it, to grab it. And it is a search which should be, he writes, I quote, by being open and approaching things from diverse perspectives. We ensure that the irreducible originality, the system breaking, the power of life creation is given its due. What lies behind this metaphysics of things, calling it like this? Even for von Balthasar, the profound seeing, Anschauen of Guardini is a fundamental task, eine grundlegende Aufgabe. I quote, having Anschauung is anything but passive. It is rather a very difficult job, making oneself available to what will be perceived. End of quotation. The experience of seeing cannot be reduced to physics. It is rather an original phenomenon. It concerns the mystery of existence of all beings and things, and existing in a certain way, presupposing a certain duty or mission. The encounter is given, the work is wanted and executed. In the encounter there is not only the essential and the particular, but also the mystery. The centrality of Guardini's reflection also emerges from the research on his literature interest. In literature, or in this interpretation, he recognizes a model of the artist-poet, whose work revolves around the authenticity of his own experience, the purity with which the I relates to the world, and the specific formative force of artistic production. It leads Guardini to state, I quote, if there is a look that among others is able to respond to the appeal of things, to give meaning and unity to the multiplicity, to history, to reconstruct from alternative perspectives, and to rearrange new worlds, this is the look of the artist. End of quotation. Through the look, we see. Guardini argues that artwork is a place where the promise of the world reveals itself, and we can encounter it through the Anschauung. Guardini's reflection on art seems to recognize the invitation and immersion of art. He writes, what is required, therefore, is understanding a work of art is not simply looking at or listening to, as we do with things which otherwise surround us, nor it's even enjoying and pleasing ourselves, as in any happy circumstances. The work of art or a thing rather opens up a space in which man can enter, in which one can breathe and move and interact with things and other humans, beings, and open oneself up. What he describes for a work of art, we can see this also applies to all things. The phenomenon, Heidegger writes, always presupposes a task. Seeing is, I quote, the answer to the reality of the fact that to be seen exists. The thing and the I, figure and its surrounding form one of the original relationships in which existence is found. The to be seen yield the ability to see. So, as Petrosino points out, it concerns a law of encounter. The attitude of being called and unlocking oneself, listening and sinking inside of yourself. Der Blick im Blick, the look in the look of the neighbor, well described in a passage of Fedone that Guardini takes up. Then Socrates, I quote, then Socrates saw them gathered there before him, as he used to do very often, and with a gentle smile he said, Diable pas. He then looked across that was close, looking into the distance, or more exactly into the interior, to the essential. Von Balthasar clarifies that this encounter is not simply a dialogue, always understood in an interpersonal manner. This perspective makes explicit the precise formative project which we can consider Guardini's primary vocation. The ontological meaning of this formative relationship is well evidenced by Balthasar. I quote, in the Socratic looking through, we would therefore be present, questioning one another, or more exactly being stimulated from he who interrogates and in communion with him, seeing him in his own origin as the one who poses the problem, and in him seeing the problem, and the security of the look that illuminates forwards, directed towards the essential. End of the quotation. The Socratic seeing through, hindurchsehen, thus contains both the questioning together, or more precisely, being stimulated by the questioner, and in communion with him, seeing him as the questioner and the problem within him from one's own origin. And the certainty of the forward-looking, essential reaching look, what he called like this. Also, it is not even possible to indicate something or someone as external to it, without being still closed in it. When becoming the world, it has already begun to subvert this division between external and internal. That is, the distinction between worlds that seems to shape the world. That this means that if we cannot simply designate the other, we cannot even simply consider it to be the same. When becoming the global world, this definition between external and internal is already being subverted. That is the distinction between world, which seems to shape the world. If we can simply name the other, we cannot even think of it as oneself. This is an impressive work, writes Jean-Luc Nancy, that awaits us because it concerns the unprecedented overcoming of an idea of the world referred to the relation of meaning, of a relationship to something, while the globalization in progress no longer leaves an outside. I quote, "It is no longer a matter of lending or giving man an extra sense, but of entering into this sense, into this gift of meaning which he himself is." End of quotation. It is the abandonment of a reflection that returns to itself, reappropriating the difference of judging the difference as an opposition and an obstacle in favor of a thought of translation as a movement without return towards the stranger. The biblical roots of this philosophical program are evident. Blanchot's words are good evidence of this, clearly highlighting the renewal relationship with the truth, to which we have been called in this new exodus that awaits us. There is a look that encounters and embraces things, not in an abstract way, but in a concrete and living way. This look is innately relational in the living I-you report, which in Balthasar's terms, restored in the vision its glory. Paying attention to and appreciating this look is much more urgent in an age in which man can embrace the whole world in one look. The look manifests things, and the vision reflects the light of this manifestation. The look is illuminated by the appearance of things. In this case, we can say that light, quote, "light manifests being in its mode of being. It manifests the mode of being in its manifestation." Especially when looking at a medieval attitude, the age of strength and fullness of the Christian experience, Guardini sees the meaning of this illumination. I come to the end. When things shine or stand out, they proceed to impose themselves so that they reveal their intimate being. To look upon is to let be, according to Heidegger's well-known perspective. And Guardini recalls his idea of gazing, seeing as giving space. This letting be, as Petroncino notes, is not to give up on, but rather refers to the gesture of stewardship and taking care of one's capability. To take, I quote, "take a step back in order that the specific thing is left to be what it is." Yes, Socrates here is a credible teacher of seeing and a doctor of understanding through asking the right question, a master of seeing through. But in dialogue with him, the students themselves don't yet understand. They have to see for themselves. There is no shared seeing, understanding, thinking, feeling. Everyone has to do it alone. One can acquire knowledge through reading and listening to prepare one's own seeing and to avoid having to start from scratch. But these shortcuts always carry the risk of imbuing oneself with the prejudice of others, which then ought to one's own prejudice, which is why asceticism are necessary. I would like to conclude now and summarize my discourse and explain the metanoia with a quote of Guardini's book of Pascal. We become a thing. Truth is thus not only the objectivity, complete in itself, which comes into play in the act of knowing of the subject. The full knowing, Pascal says, full knowing content arises only in the movement of knowing. This does not in the least mean an establishment of the thing through the thought categories of the subject. The thing in itself stands outside, and it is as such complete. Knowledge is really encounter with the thing subsisting in itself. But the purpose of knowledge does not at all consist in the reflection of the thing in itself. Its aim is rather that world come into being in the act of knowing. Something then which is this thing of knowledge, but also I, the knowing subject, both together and more than the sum total of them. The really known in its fullness is the quote, quote, the thing in me and I in the thing. It is the thing which, when known, becomes part of my life, and it is becomes something new. I am he who, knowing, define myself by the thing, risk myself onto the thing, enter into the thing, linger in the sphere of its objective determination, and it becomes something which I can only become here. Pascal in 1966. And so that means in this dialogical encounter with the living concrete thing and its truth, the thing in me and I in the thing are transformed, and thus I become a more authentic form, a more authentic work of art before God. We therefore become nothing at all, except in the context of total works of art, such as liturgy, drama, and so on, which absorbed my we. And the last sentence is, so we understand when Guardini writes, knowledge is always in some way an encounter in love. Thank you.